Welcome to Muffin Talk. Brother Kieran, we have now entered the season of Lent. It is traditionally a time of fasting for 40 days, which is often referred to Mark 1:12-15, when Jesus was in the desert and was tempted by Satan. Is this how we can imagine the start into Lent?
Well, I think it's good to sort of have that as the start. But all of that is moving towards the finish. And the finish, of course, is the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. Because what kind of Messiah is he going to be is the essence of the temptation. John's passion narrative is a victory journey. And Jesus dies with those beautiful words on his lips. It is accomplished. And also, of course, in that, somebody once wisely said that everybody in the passion narrative of John is on trial except for Jesus. Right.
But Lent is really a time of preparation for this very special time of the Passion.
Oh, yes. So let's just go deeper. Now, going to John's Gospel, though, for the supper, there's no Eucharistic text in John when you get into the Last Supper. Back in chapter 6, we've got a whole chapter in John on the Eucharist itself. But what John does have, of course, is that magnificent scene of Jesus washing the feet. The message is clear that in the Eucharist we receive the one who gave himself for us that we may give ourselves for others. So the washing of the feet shows the very meaning of the Eucharist.
Is that only in one Gospel, the washing of the feet?
One Gospel, John. And, of course, the betrayal is mentioned in John's Gospel. The betrayal will be by the one by whom I will give this morsel to him. So Jesus dips the morsel in the dish. And that piece, go out and do what you have to do. And it finishes with that, it was night. It was dark. Light and darkness thread their way through the Gospel of John so strongly. And instead of the sort of brief action that we get in the Last Supper and the other Gospels, in John's Gospel we get all those chapters from 14 to 17, the vine and the branches, and then, of course, the great priestly prayer of Jesus. So, different version of the supper. Well, what about the agony in the garden in John? Well, the interesting thing is, there's a garden but no agony, right? In the other Gospels, there's actually an agony and no garden mentioned. So with true Catholic inclusiveness, we have the agony in the garden as the first sorrowful mystery.
That means that it's like a merging of all Gospels.
Yes, exactly, right. But
it's possible that it happened like that, and just one person remembered this, and the other one remembered that.
But see, all of the Gospels are based on the memories and the eyewitnesses' account that come down through 40, 50, 60 years of telling stories, the oral tradition. But now when we come to John's Gospel, the soldiers arrive, and those soldiers come from the Jewish and from the Roman establishments. "Who are you seeking?" says Jesus. "I am he." And they fall to the ground, right? So not quite the versions we're getting in the other ones. And then, with royal imperiousness, he tells the soldiers, "Let these ones go." Because after all, Jesus didn't make any mistakes in choosing those 12. And then, of course, we have the fascinating story of who the diggers wielded the sword to cut off the ear. Because in Mark, it could have been one of the crowd. In Matthew, it's one of the disciples. And we get Luke is sort of in the same sort of,
tradition.
Well, by the time you get to John, it's Peter, because that's the sort of thing that impetuous Peter would do. And we get the details of Malchus, and we also find out it's the right ear. And if he's a servant of the high priest, he's no longer physically perfect and cannot carry out duties any longer. So all of this interesting stuff emerges. And then to go a bit we move on to the trial. In John's Gospel, you don't find any carrying of the cross, being helped. In John's Gospel, Jesus carries that cross himself, right? There's no assistant needed at all. He does it all on his own. And then, of course, even with that trial, Jesus appears before Annas rather than Caiaphas to start the narrative. We have the denial by Peter. Then we have the high point of the passion narrative of the trial of John's Gospel are the 7 scenes with Pilate. There are 7 little snippets, and that's the biggest feature of the passion narrative in the Gospel of John. And the wonderful thing at the end is a striking scene where Pilate brings Jesus out and sits him, or takes the mercy seat, the seat of judgment, the Gabbatha, the judgment seat. Now, who sits on the judgment seat? Is it Pilate or is it Jesus? And it seems as though it's Jesus. And so the judge is judged by Jesus sitting on the judgment seat. So, again, there's that tragic line. I know that how in Matthew you have that terrible line that but the equivalent in John, we have no king but Caesar. That's the ultimate denial of the authority. Oh yes, the Matthew line was, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." The denial of the God as their king is a dreadful finish to the trial in the Gospel of John. And then we come to the final, the crucifixion itself. And I think the great thing about the Gospels are they don't dwell on gory details. And then the title written above the cross, each Gospel has a different wording. So, but when you come to the crucifixion in the Gospel of John, that's so striking because it's only there that the mother and the beloved disciple appear. And then you have the side of Jesus pierced with a spear, blood and water flowing out, and that's birth, the blood and water scene. And of course, Jesus breathes his last. He hands over his spirit to the little community of the man and the woman at the foot of the cross.
The ones who trusted him.
Our representatives for the future of the church. The birth imagery is so powerful. And then, of course, the body is taken down from the cross, and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they have 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes to put in the tomb. I don't know how they fitted the body in with all of that, because this is actually the burial of a king. So you can see again the sort of the richness of the death of Jesus, the recognition of his messianic and kingly dignity. That's John. Whereas John's Gospel finishes with this, those wonderful words that he speaks where it is accomplished, the completion of his life. And of course that's where, you began with Lent, you began with fasting, but the end of fasting is the richness that comes with the resurrection and Holy Week. And John's passion narrative is what makes Good Friday good, this wonderful message of salvation, where the whole meaning of the life of Jesus comes to its completion. And where in the other Gospels, where the type of Messiah is going to be. So I actually quite love those temptation stories, because the two in Matthew and Luke, of course, Mark's story is very brief. Jesus is the new Adam with the animals.
Yeah.
There. But with Matthew, you have, of course, stones turned into bread, and really the Word of God is bread for us when we really get into the Scriptures. And then the second for Matthew is where Jesus is taken to the temple. And then the third, of course, he's taken to the mountaintop. Matthew's Gospel is all about mountains. Here's another one, Mount Calvary. But it's Moses, the Mount Sinai, and Jesus, the new teacher, the Sermon on the Mount. So we've got those two Gospels spanning Holy Week. And it's so important to be able to identify what happens in one Gospel. To hear that this is the height, this is where all the Gospels are leading to with the life of Jesus. We need to know the Gospels. And we come back to that line of Jerome, ignorance of the Scriptures is ignorance of Christ. Or my favourite, and I say it all the time, from Irenaeus, the presence of the Lord in His Word is as real as His presence in the Eucharist. So what would happen if at the end of each Mass we asked ourselves, did the living Lord step out of the Word as effectively as the living Lord stepped out of the Eucharist? That's the responsibility of good readers. Focus more and more on the Scriptures. Because, I see so much of the Scriptures speaking to our day.
Out there, heroic peace is calling. In the bonds of love we meet. For the world a new day dawning and shine.